To unpack the real issues affecting the Tasman nations, this is Trans Tasman Talk. Jointly produced by the unshackled.net and rightminds.nz. Now here's Tim Willems in Australia and Diewue in New Zealand.
Good evening and welcome to the show. The date is Tuesday, the 5th of November 2019. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne on Cup Day. Vaughan de Clare won the race. The Reserve Bank of Australia met 30 minutes prior to the race and kept rates at a record low of 0.75%. Actually, it's not 7 p.m. here in Melbourne because we were late tonight. It's 10 minutes past now, had some audio issues, but we're back now. Our live audience should be able to hear us.
That's right, and hopefully they can hear me as well this time. Okay, good. It looks like they can. And so it's 10 past 9 p.m. here in Auckland, and it is Guy Fawkes today. You can likely hear the fireworks in the background. You'll be able to hear them off and on throughout the show. We are celebrating the failed Jesuit plot to blow up the Protestant Parliament of King James. And that's something we celebrate here in New Zealand every single year. And I'm not sure if you do in Australia, but I hope being part of the Commonwealth and all that is a shared tradition.
Well, it's called Cracker Night here. I remember last week when it was Halloween, last Thursday night, we had our Uncockables program on Halloween night. There was a lot of obviously anti-Halloween grumps because it's American, even though everything in our culture comes from America, and so they were promoting Cracker Night instead as a great Australian tradition. You're a Protestant, aren't you, Diewue?
Yes, I am a Protestant, and so on the 31st of October we celebrate Reformation Day, and then now a week later we get to have Guy Fawkes as well. So it's a good time, good week to be a Protestant.
Now, as with any national day of significance in Australia these days, there's always some sort of, I wouldn't say leftist counter-protest on this occasion, because you and I, we both know a right-wing animal rights activist. So I'll just say,
right, we do.
It was an animal welfare protest. It was called Nup to the Cup, so you could change your profile picture to that. Basically because, well, animal welfare and rights advocates have said that horse racing is cruel, both in, well, how they're treated during the race, they're whipped, and also how they're treated off the race course. And evidence was alleged evidence was broadcast on the ABC 7:30 program on the Thursday, the 18th of October, which was 2 days before the Everest, which is Sydney's cheap, modern imitation version of the Melbourne Cup. They aired that 2 nights before and showed that retired racehorses were being sent to the slaughterhouse, and they weren't being slaughtered humanely. There was a lot of, in the abattoirs, a lot of kicking and punching of the horses, which of course upset a lot of people. And so there's a bit of the political class, because they know how much revenue it brings in, the spring racing carnival in both major cities now, to the state governments, and how much it brings to the local economy. And especially everyone is quite scarred by the experience of the New South Wales Liberal and National government when, after ABC Four Corners episode, they decided to ban greyhound racing in the state of New South Wales. And there was a huge rural backlash, which the Liberal Premier Mike Baird, he ended up resigning, and the National Party Deputy Premier Troy Grant, he ended up resigning as well. And the New South Wales Nationals, they've never recovered, with the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party winning 3 lower house seats since the 2015 New South Wales state election. So both state and federal governments are very worried about wrecking the racing economy, both in just the not just the gaming. Obviously, the gaming is a big part of it, but the local communities, because you obviously have racehorse trainers, then you have the jockeys and all the other economic activity that's attached to it. So even though you have a lot of social justice warrior politicians these days, especially from the Labour Party, they definitely don't want to upset the cup spring racing economy.
And their own, elites, high rollers, the quote unquote one percenters who like to engage in the revelries and debaucheries that come with the cup. Those photos are shared every year. I see it here in New Zealand. The Melbourne Cup was trending on number one trending on New Zealand Twitter today as well. I think the racehorsing that goes on, the level of the amount of stress, the amount of pain generally that these horses go through at the top level is something that the animal rights activists have a very good case against. My wife used to do all kinds of horse jumping and so on. She didn't do racing specifically, but these horses that are bred to race and so on, they do love racing. But there's a point at which these animals, especially in the upper levels of racing, are pushed to the physical limits.
Yes, and obviously whoever's got the cup rights in Australia, it used to be Channel 7, Network 10 had it for the first time this year. They start their coverage around 9 in the morning with all the celebrities arriving at the marquee, the blokes in their tailor-made suits, and the ladies with their dresses, and of course their feathers in their hats. And yes, it is I hope our audience doesn't mind me saying it, very bourgeois event. You've just shared a article up on the screen, Diewue.
I have somehow. I don't believe I have. Huh. Sorry.
It's basically the chattering classes and a lot of aspirational middle class people who want to basically prove that they're socialites. They go to the Melbourne Cup or in their fancy outfits to say, look, we're mingling with society's high class, with the celebrities. And of course, I couldn't find it. There was a famous, do you know Nando's? Do you have Nando's over there? Nando's Chicken in New Zealand?
Yes, we do have Nando's.
Yeah.
Nando's Chicken just about everywhere.
They released a commercial years back. It was after a certain cup day, where it has all of the drunkards on the ground, men urinating just behind the fences. They're basically, the reality of what Cup Day is exposed about 5 p.m. That you just see all the sloshing around, and that's the truth. You probably compare the cup projection to Instagram, where everyone fakes this image of success and happiness, and by 5 p.m. at the end of Cup Day, it's basically exposed.
Then it's all over. And the Melbourne Cup was not the only sporting event to have come by this past week. Of course, the Rugby World Cup concluded. On last week's show, we talked a bit about the England creating this sort of V formation against the haka that was performed by the All Blacks. And at the time, we hadn't quite had the fallout from that yet, but it seems now that after initially announcing it as quite a cool thing, the rugby, the officials, and I forget what they're called.
International Rugby Association Board, something like that.
Yeah, it's a good name, and so that's right, and they posted this clip to their Twitter feed and said, "Oh, this is an incredible response to the intense New Zealand haka," and then they ended up fining England a 4-figure sum, which is not very huge really in terms of how much money they make at these events, but they got that for breaking some kind of little rule that they were clearly not trying to to break that rule. They were not trying to break the spirit of that rule. And the V formation seemed to work very well against New Zealand, but they didn't have it. They couldn't keep it up. Because they did end up losing to South Africa. So a lot of Kiwis here think that we sort of got our revenge, and the South Africans obviously have something to celebrate. But most of New Zealand is of English heritage, and I think there were probably divided loyalties there on who to support now.
One of our local satire online publications, there's a few of them now, the Batuta Advocate, they published an article that England beats its former colony.
Nah, that's mean. But it turns out that the other former colony, then beat England, so we're square.
Oh well, it's a republic now. But both our nations, we're still part of the Commonwealth with the
Right.
Queen as our monarch. So, well, we are still a colony in a way.
And speaking of being a colony and so on, we've had a debate this past week being ignited by Andrew Little around the euthanasia bill that's been approved for its third reading, which it likely will pass because an amendment was made that will see it go to a referendum, and that referendum is likely to have a heated debate. And so Andrew Little, in his infinite wisdom, announced that he was going to be setting up a special sort of task force to keep an eye on misinformation. This has been called a Ministry of Truth by both sides of this debate, because nobody trusts Andrew Little to control his Ministry of Truth to determine what is misinformation and what is not.
Yes, and it's funny that major political parties come election time, they're not held to truth in advertising standards anywhere in the world.
No, and we do have an advertising standards authority here in New Zealand, and Andrew Little has actually said that he doesn't trust the advertising standards authority to make the right decisions. So he wants his own little agency that sits above them that can make where basically he can make his own personal rulings as to what constitutes misinformation and what does not.
Well, there's obviously the big furor has been in the US recently with their 2020 election coming up, and of course the UK they're finally having a general election so they can turf out that broken and betraying parliament. Everyone's mad that Facebook they're not going to take down misleading ads. Of course, when it comes to misleading political ads, it's entirely subjective, and it's interesting that Facebook in the UK made that decision, even though Nick Clegg, who is the former Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Democrats, which is the most leftist party in the UK, he said, no, we're not going to police the election ads on Facebook for truth in advertising.
And in related news, Twitter has basically bailed out of the advertising industry, political advertising industry completely, saying that they're not going to be running any ads at all anymore. And we do have a sort of a censorship organization in New Zealand as well. We have a position that is officially known as the Chief Censor. I'm not sure if you have one of those, but the Americans always love to find out that New Zealand has an actual job title of Chief Censor. And the chief censor gets to censor stuff, but he tends to be really weird in what he censors. So this week, for instance, past week, a violent video game about the Christchurch mosque shooting has been banned. And also the chief censor has banned the American synagogue manifesto, the gunman, or not, it says the synagogue gunman. It must be the German one, I believe. Anyway, so he's banning manifestos in video games, but a number of people have asked him to ban literature, like a book called 44 Ways to Support Jihad. But apparently 44 Ways to Support Jihad does not meet our censor's threshold for what constitutes violent extremism. But certain types of manifestos clearly do.
Oh, well, we just had our ABC, our national broadcaster last night, air their Q&A program. It was an all-feminist panel for the Melbourne Broadside Festival, which was taxpayer-funded as well, where you had, well, obviously the worst panelist was Mona Esway, who's an Egyptian-American feminist writer who wrote in a recent book, The 7 Deadly Sins for Women and Girls, that maybe we needed to kill up to 1 million men to fight the patriarchy. And she didn't repeat that exactly on the show, but said that maybe violence against men, political violence, is justified if we want to abolish the patriarchy. Basically, yeah, ABC put to air a call to political violence, not a direct call, but suggesting it, and that was completely unchallenged. The host, Frank Kelly, said, those are fighting words. Where you can imagine if a right-wing nationalist said that on television, of course, what would happen? There'd be police raids the next day.
And, the Twitter mobs would be out in full force. Before we move on to the next topic, I think I'll just say hello to everyone in the chat. We did have a little bit of trouble getting this show started this week, so we are reading your comments. Please do go ahead, and we are also streaming not just on the Right Minds YouTube channel and the Unshackled YouTube channel. We also are up on the bfd.co.nz as well, which I shall mention, which is sort of New Zealand's right-wing media blog conglomerate that has actually a bunch of centrist and even left-wing opinions as well. Very, very diverse.
So is it streaming directly to that site, or is it an embed?
Yeah, I've embedded our stream into there as well, yeah. So
in
case anybody's come across from there.
The more the merrier.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So our I mentioned euthanasia going up for a referendum. We're also going to have marijuana legalisation go up for a referendum as well next year.
Is advertising standards being applied to that?
There have been advertising complaints, but I don't believe there has been any special mention of advertising standards going to be applied. But we know that if Andrew Little gets his Ministry of Truth, there will most definitely most definitely be expanding that to include as much as he can. We've got a few other contentious bills before Parliament and select committees at the moment. We've got the firearms legislation, the second tranche, as they call it, and there have been protests outside the committee. Very good orderly protests by members of the firearms community. That's been well received. I talked a lot about that last week. There's still the possibility of that being ditched. And the abortion select committee has also continued having its hearings. And the big debate this week has been the committee has been hearing from several factions arguing for and against the inclusion of pregnant people, so that it's inclusive language, so that men can also have abortion, and men don't feel left out of having abortions. And then you've had the radical feminists say that no, to remove the word woman from the Abortion Act, it destroys their sense of purpose, destroys their identity as women and their unique special status as women to get to abort their babies.
So do you still have some of those trans exclusionary radical feminists in New Zealand? I think
Yes,
you talked about them last week. Yes,
we did talk about this last week, and they're still going strong in New Zealand. And so there was a bit of an argument there with one of the members of the committee, and I can probably find who it is. It was the Green Party MP, Jan. I think it's Jan Logie or Jan Logie, probably Jan.
We had I talked about in the state of New South Wales their abortion decriminalisation bill, where one of the amendments that failed to what was a radical bill is to define the people who get pregnant as women. It's now pregnant person.
So you have got pregnant person.
Yes.
Our bill still says pregnant women, but there is that the request is to have it changed. Basically, that's where the arguments are going on. And the Green MP on the committee, Jan Logie, she wants it changed and has been hearing several people arguing for and against that. I've got a quote here from Jan Rivers, who is a self-identified gender-critical feminist. So that's what they call themselves, rather than TERFs or radical feminists, just gender-critical. And she doesn't believe in gender identity. If woman is replaced with person, to me that seems to be the thinner end of the wedge in saying that we believe people get pregnant and not women, and therefore people who don't believe in gender identity will be castigated. And she goes on to say that this is against the Human Rights Committee of marginalizing. The defense was that the Human Rights Commission apparently wants to accept the marginalized community of men who can get pregnant, much like Australia has done. So yeah, you think this is crazy. I would not have believed we'd be having this as a serious conversation even several months ago, but the world is getting crazier a lot faster. I'm seeing here the numbers as well, that in Australia 22 men, quote unquote, have given birth in the past year, but that data is not available in New Zealand. So there you go. Apparently, men getting pregnant and giving birth is a big problem over there in Australia. I think it's something you need to have a look at, Tim.
Yes, it used to be just in, was it those comedy movies, what with Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger, men are getting pregnant. What was it called, that movie, Junior? But it's not a laughing matter anymore.
No, it isn't. And a lot of things that were comedy in the past are now dead serious.
Well, have you heard that Baby It's Cold Outside? It's been rewritten because the original one suggested date rape.
Yes, there's a Canadian commentator called named Mark Stein, and he's talked a lot about this "Baby It's Cold Outside" thing, because he loves that classical, whatever style, almost folk music now, I suppose, the old pop songs. But he always points out that "Baby It's Cold Outside" was heard by one of the leading scholars of the Muslim Brotherhood, who went back to Egypt and basically turned the Muslim Brotherhood into a terrorist organization. So "Baby It's Cold Outside" started the terrorist. They had such a problem with "Baby It's Cold Outside" they started a terrorist organization, and that's pretty much the point at which the left is as well. They're on the verge of having ripping society apart because they're being radicalized by "Baby It's Cold Outside."
Yeah, important point there. Now, we should remind our Australian audience that referendums in New Zealand, you don't actually have a written constitution, so they're all non-binding. Because in Australia, we have referendums which are about amending the constitution, where we're still... It's been going on for nearly a decade now, recognising Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. First, it was just going to be in the preamble, but now there was the Uluru Statement from the Heart, where the Indigenous elders who signed it, they want a voice to Parliament now, which, of course, what is it? Is it a third chamber based on race? And Scott Morrison, he appointed Ken Wyatt as the Indigenous Affairs Minister. He's the first person of Indigenous descent to hold that portfolio. He was also the first Indigenous person elected to the House of Representatives. So he keeps saying that yes, he wants the some sort of voice enshrined in the Constitution. Has also backed the morning of mourning on Australia Day, which I think talked about last week. And remember, I did a whole segment last week on this Indigenous academic Marsha Langton and all the sort of fruity things she said on Twitter. Well, the next day, Ken Wyatt appointed her as one of the advisors to help reformulate this Indigenous voice in the Constitution consultation process. And of course, a lot of the conservative commentators said here, what a Liberal Conservative government is appointing, of all the Indigenous high-profile people, appointing this a woman. And Ken Wyatt was asked about that, and he's like, oh, she's been a dear friend of mine. We've got along well over the years. Yes, but you didn't check her Twitter.
I wonder whether the Twitters of many of these other activists would have been any better. You'd probably be better served without an activist kind of appointee. For the benefit of myself and the New Zealand audience, is the Indigenous inclusion in the Constitution, is that something that's been passed, or the idea is that they want to put that to a referendum and they're trying to figure out what amendment to put to the referendum?
Because only 8 amendments to the Constitution have been passed out of 43 attempts since Australia federated since 1901. So they want to get the wording right. So Australians, there's no way you can possibly be argued to them to vote no. This is why it's taken nearly a decade to get the wording right. We of course had the marriage law postal survey. Was it 2 years ago now? That was non-binding, but it's the politicians made the ultimate decision. It just asked, should the law be changed to allow 2 people of the same sex to marry? Interesting, then, you talk about the Ministry of Truth laws. During that time, we had the emergency vilification laws passed by the Parliament to make sure that feelings weren't hurt during that postal survey campaign.
You mentioned as well about binding or non-binding referenda in New Zealand, which is the citizens-initiated ones are non-binding, and the government can also pass non-binding ones. But these 2 referenda will both be attached to legislation. So the legislation will have a clause saying if this is passed by Parliament, it will only go in. It'll only go into effect if it is passed, by a popular vote at a referendum. So both the euthanasia bill and the weed bill that has not yet been passed, they will both be binding, because the legislation to support them will already have been passed.
Oh, so it's like a trigger in the legislation. Yes. Oh, I see. Because you had that 10 years ago, that smacking referendum to overturn the child smacking laws. What was the result of that, and how did the politicians react?
Yeah. So the results was that they passed the anti-smacking bill, and there was a citizens-initiated referendum to ask should a smack as part of parental correction be criminalised, and the result of that was no, about 60 to 70%. To my knowledge, and the support for that in recent polls, since then has been higher. But the government basically said, "Oh no, the bill itself doesn't actually criminalise smacking, or it makes it very ambiguous because it removes, a certain legal defence." So they basically said, we accept the referendum. We don't actually have to change anything though, because because it doesn't have anything to do with the bill. So I think if you want to especially if you want to use referenda was it 90? So someone's been saying in the chat here, it was 90% plus. I believe that's the current polling rather than the actual result. If somebody could grab the percentage result of that referendum, but they've managed to weasel their way out of referendums and ignore them. So if you're trying to repeal specific legislation, it would be helpful to maybe say, should this legislation be repealed, and try and put that to a referendum. But that's not actually happened specifically.
Now it seems that
87%. Sorry, 87% was.
That's a lot more.
Yeah.
Overwhelming majority. Now, it seemed that false start benefited our live audience for tonight, because it's quite active now. I think the false start enticed a lot of people to make sure that they tune in. So, yes, keep up the discussion in the live chat. And remember, on the Unshackled channel, you can send a super chat directly via YouTube with the $sign button, which of course goes to help the production of this show and the rest of the Unshackled's work. Now, you're of course aware, maybe not just through talking with me, that my city of Melbourne is the home of radical Marxist activism, and they were at it again last week when the International Mining and Resources Conference was held at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. Now, all the various, it was the 2 main organisers were Socialist Alternative and Socialist Alliance. Most people get them confused, but if you follow Marxist politics closely, like our associate editor Lucas Rosas, you'll know that there's a big difference between the two organisations. So they were planning for months this blockade outside this mining conference because they contain the world's biggest climate criminals, and they claim that because one of the organisers, Jacob Andrew Warra, he for some reason agreed to do an interview with Andrew Bolt on Sky News, where he basically said that in his view, democracy is not about winning votes at the ballot box, but basically street mobilization and see who can get the most numbers everywhere. Basically, we're going to have a whole bunch of warlords running the city. So he was basically wrecked. But they were really triggered the Marxist groups that police, Victoria Police, they made sure that the entrance couldn't be blocked, and they used quite a bit of force to push them away. And well, that actually wasn't the physical force by the police that they were most triggered by. It was there was one police officer who wrote over his body camera EAD, which stands for Eat a Dick Hippie. And then there was also another police officer who did the OK sign, which the Anti-Defamation League in the United States has now decreed that it always means white supremacy. And again, our ABC, they interviewed one of the local radical communist activists, Tom Tanuki. They just called him a left-wing activist. He runs the group Yelling at Racist Dogs, where his organisation is part of the counter protests to a lot of the Patriot and conservative events where he just yells abuse at them. His real name is Thomas Stevens, but of course they just used his pseudonym on the news. Tom Tanuki have just called him a left-wing activist. So he uncovered that this police officer, I won't name him because he's probably copying enough abuse as it is. I want to respect his privacy, especially since there's a lot of pressure on Victoria Police to investigate. That they uncovered on his private Facebook page that he had shared the NPC meme and also Pepe the Frog. So he didn't lay a finger on a protester, but doing this. They want an inquiry into racism in the Victoria Police now because of this sign.
Yes, it sounds like you've got a real infiltration of alt-right, frog-loving extremists into the police force.
Well, the Labor Premier of Queensland, she only recently made the OK sign in the state parliament. I mean, how come she hasn't been removed from office? There's no impeachment process in Australia. Let's invent one to get rid of this white supremacist premier.
It's almost unavoidable, and I think there's a little video of Jacinda we're planning to play at the end, but I'll tell people in advance here. There's just watch her hands, and you can see her really hard trying not to just like flash the OK sign at everyone all the time. I'll mention it again when we get to it, but it was the first thing I noticed about the video. Yeah.
Yes, I showed Anastasia Palaszczuk there. There's a whole bunch of leftist leaders who've used the OK sign. It's basically that the left have fallen for this 4chan troll. Well, I think more than all of us imagined is that they now basically think it's the new Nazi salute.
Yeah, and they're complaining about these these imaginary things that they see, or if they're real people, a troll, like it was invented as a troll, as a joke. But when you've got the case in Auckland this week, we had a Hong Kongers protest doing a free Hong Kong rally. Or I don't think it's even a free Hong Kong rally. They just want to help maintain the current system, the current status that Hong Kong enjoys. And they were counter-protested by mainland Chinese who were supporting the Communist Party, and part of this protest, you had two young men in PLA uniforms.
Yes,
they
I've
look
got
very authentic.
got the footage here. I'll just play it.
So you can play the footage, but they're goose stepping down. The centre of Auckland. That's Aotea Square. So you've got actual fascists goose stepping down the middle of an Auckland street, and nobody bats an eye. The leftists are not outraged. There's no Antifa anywhere to be seen when you have this kind of behaviour, and those uniforms, as far as anyone can tell, look pretty legitimate. And I'm pretty sure that those, they're probably exchange students who served in the Chinese military, marching with their flag down the streets of New Zealand, and nobody, there's no outcry from the media. There's no outcry from any politicians. There's no outcry from any left-wing activists. It's just accepted as normal that the members or former members of the Chinese military can just march down the streets with their uniforms and flags.
Well, when the China tensions in Australia started to flare up, spotted in various Australian cities were police cars in Chinese, like they looked like Chinese police cars because they were all in Mandarin, and people were wondering, were they authentic or trolls, or was this part of an intimidation in the people of Australia? So that happened, it was a few months ago now, but that got quite a number of people alarmed. It was actually not long after Andrew Hastie, the Liberal backbencher, wrote his op-ed in the Fairfax papers talking about how we needed to take the threat posed by China much more seriously and think of them as a big threat to Australia's future interest.
And we have also had a Chinese warship visiting Wellington this week. Apparently, they're practicing on how to sail through the Cook Strait that separates the North and South Islands. If you're familiar with the Cook Strait, it's quite wide and takes about an hour or two to get across with a boat. Although that probably involves all of the docking processes and so on. I'm not sure how quickly a warship can do it. But yes, apparently the Chinese military needs to know how to navigate the Cook Strait here in New Zealand, and they're down in Wellington to practice that. Again, no outcry that I have heard of. But these peace action activists are always out in force when, say, an American warship comes for a visit or anything else. But if it's in a genuine fascist state, then that's not something they could protest, because they might actually get in trouble. There might be actual repercussions if they complain too much.
Well, there was an article published in the Conversation, which is the academics online website, where basically all the academics from around the nation submit their it's called The Conversation, but they haven't just banned columns from climate skeptics, but banned comments which express climate skepticism now. So It's a limited conversation. They published a article on Monday suggesting that the Morrison government was becoming more authoritarian because in response to the IMARC attempted blockade last week, which they only got about 300, 400, they were hoping for 5,000 people there. So they didn't get, despite all the months of planning, didn't get the crowd they wanted. Scott Morrison it was a Queensland Resources event, said that his government wanted to look at making secondary environmental boycotts illegal. I'm not sure if you know what secondary boycotts are, but it's basically there's already laws against trade unions engaging in secondary boycotts. So, for example, say if a union is in a dispute with a brick company and they apply pressure on the cement mixer to not supply the concrete to the bricks, that's the secondary boycott, that's illegal. So it's basically, the way it would work here is that it would be illegal to threaten to boycott a bank if they were going to finance a new coal or mining project, because that's why a lot of the major banks won't lend to fund new mining and coal projects, because of activist pressure.
I'm actually surprised that there's enough activists to make that work. The banks usually can absorb a little bit of a.
Well, they're all woke now in
scale.
Australia,
Yeah,
and
so
they have
that's the problem.
they have the shareholder activists now. Like they'll own
Whereas
maybe
I don't
one or
think
two
that's the
shares.
secondary. Yeah, exactly. So I'm not really sure if if secondary boycotts would actually work to make the banks more likely to lend, because we do live in the era of woke capitalism, where the big businesses love to do the virtue signaling. As long as they keep making money, as much money as they normally do, then they'll virtue signal as much as they can. That's the most important thing, of course.
And of course, Peter Dutton, the Home Affairs Minister, he suggested that climate change protesters who break the law should be stripped of their welfare payments. He didn't say that protesters should be stripped, but the ones who block traffic and haul before a magistrate and found guilty, they of course don't get a conviction, normally just a $100 fine. That was apparently limiting free speech, and this is of course the warped twisting of free speech, which they call civil disobedience. Now that of course we're in a climate emergency, and so civil disobedience is needed, because people won't listen to us through legal means, which I think that normally means that people don't agree or are convinced by your arguments. So, well, of course, we saw it on the ABC last night when I was talking about they're advocating political violence. Maybe we need to kill 1 million men to dismantle the patriarchy. You see where the logic goes.
I think your recent example goes well into my sort of 2020 campaign update for what's going on in New Zealand here, because the National Party has announced some welfare policies, and they're looking at taking welfare away from people as well. And their two big targets there have been those who don't vaccinate, so that no jab, no pay policy.
Yeah, we've got for it's mainly for childcare subsidies, and also to send your child to public schools. To my knowledge, somebody in the comments can correct me, that it's not directly linked to welfare.
That's interesting. So National would like to link that directly to welfare.
I think it is linked to family tax benefits, because we have.
Maybe that's what they're talking about here as well. And the other one is gang members. If you're a member of a gang, which is I think getting a lot of pushback. I mean, both of these are getting pushback in terms of individual choice and being being guilty until being guilty until proven innocent. Which is the issue around the gangs. They're saying, well, if somebody's a member of a gang, then they can't receive welfare unless they can prove that they're not receiving any other income. And people saying, well, rightly that would be a difficult thing to prove, that you're not receiving other income. But there is also I believe a large segment of the New Zealand population that is sick of gangs and is happy to see a little bit of that pressure placed on them. How effective it'll be, or whether it's just going to get votes for Simon Bridges, will remain to be seen. But those are their big policy announcements of this week, and we're likely to keep seeing more and more of these, week after week or every couple of weeks, going into the election that will probably take place about this time next year. And the other big development has been, the selection of a new botany candidate. Most Australians won't necessarily know what botany is, but it's an electorate in Auckland, East Auckland. And it is currently held by an independent, Jamie Lee Ross, who was ejected from the National Party for all kinds of shenanigans. But what he is famous for, the good thing he's famous for anyway, is the exposing the Chinese Communist Party connected donations to the National Party. And so the former CEO of Air New Zealand, Christopher Luxon, has been selected to run as the national candidate against Jamie Lee Ross. and you will see what comes out of Luxon. He has quite a high profile. He's been a CEO for a long time. He's developed very tight relationships, business relationships with China as well, which is very important in New Zealand politics. He is also supposed to be a Christian, so we're seeing some angles of his social views being complained about. But I believe that Air New Zealand has turned into a kind of they've run all of these very woke and LGBT ads and all kinds of policies in his tenure. So I don't really think that's going to go anywhere. But it seems like I think he should have no trouble, in that seat that especially has a very strong, the very large Chinese community in Botany as well, and very, very heavy National Party focused electorate. I believe 70% or so of the vote there goes to the National Party. So that's a pretty solid, safe national seat.
And Chinese, they're also social conservatives as well. They were big in our No campaign during the marriage law postal survey.
And as well, so I believe most of the candidates, or I know for sure at least 2 or 3 of the candidates running were social, would be leaning more towards social conservative. In the National Party, it can always be a little bit here or there. Same thing in the Labour Party. The social conservatives until they have to swap out their principles for something else. The Chinese community definitely would tend more towards social conservatism, which is why the deputy leader of the New Conservative Party, Elliot Ekeley, who you've interviewed in the past, he's going to be running in that seat as well. So it could be a big kind of high profile, high media kind of race where you get a lot of media attention. So that could benefit. Will remain to be seen who that's going to benefit.
Going back to the biker gangs, they've actually got some good PR in Australia this week, because a bikie who's imprisoned in Adelaide bashed a pedophile in the showers, and so there's been you can imagine on Facebook a lot of the pedogate pages are like you legend. So
yeah. We've talked a little bit about the gangs getting good press in New Zealand in the past, but it's that press has not deterred the National Party from taking them on. I think the final, what could be called a development for sort of 2020, but is also a regular segment on the show, which I think will be my final New Zealand focused item. The Shane Jones segment, and hopefully everyone who's watching knows who Shane Jones is by now. He's the MP for New Zealand First, and he's got the sort of the ministry. He's got a portfolio for sort of economic development in rural areas, and he is known for his controversial statements. And this week's statement was him saying that if immigrants don't like his immigration policy, then they should get on the next plane and go home. That upset a lot of people. Patrick Gower, our favorite comedian, meltdown about this.
He's probably the most left-wing journalist you have in the nation. We should mention that one of his recent stories was him becoming a drag queen.
Yes, he got famous by becoming a Nazi hunter, and then he decided to smoke weed, and then after smoking weed, he became a drag queen. Currently he's keeping it quiet. So he did call out Shane Jones, and the change, the immigration change that Shane Jones was defending was a new partnership visa policy, and the Indian community is called it racist because they argue it's more difficult for those who are in arranged marriages to get residency. They're sort of playing the race card on immigration, and Shane Jones has stood his ground, and it's likely that policy is going to stay. The interesting thing that a lot of people don't really know is the New Zealand government doesn't really recognise relationships unless you've been cohabiting for like at least a year. So in order to be married, if you're married, to truly be married, you basically have to be living together for a year in terms of what the government recognizes as an official relationship. So they do issue their own marriage certificates and licensing if you want to get a same-sex marriage, and you can get one of those, but you've got to actually be either living together for years prior, or once you've got your piece of paper, you got to be living together for a year or more before the government won't kick you out of the country. And so it's going to be the same like that. Has it been changed to 2 years now? That could be the complaint, that it's been changed to 2 years, especially for people coming into the country. But if you're in the country to stay, it definitely had been 1 year. It was 1 year in the past. And yes, Shane Jones does have several nicknames that have been put into the chat, into the Right Minds chat, that I won't repeat for now.
And the issue here is that this policy is not culturally sensitive, and it seems that a lot of Indian men or women want to bring their arranged spouse over to marry them, which is basically, if it's an arranged one, it's almost a de facto immigration scam. And but in this situation, of as I said, of course, it's cultural insensitivity. How dare you call it an immigration scam? And
it has been. That's why they sort of developed these policies, because of immigration-related issues and people claiming benefits and so on.
And final 2020 New Zealand election is, Jacinda Ardern, she celebrated 2 years of Winston Peters making her the Prime Minister, and she put out a Twitter video outlining her achievements in 2 minutes, which we'll play in full and then offer our analysis. So I'll just mute my microphone.
Watch the hands. Watch the hands.
Good everyone. So this week is the 2-year anniversary of the creation of this government, and the team has decided to set me a challenge to see whether or not I can run through the last 2 years in 2 minutes. So here's some key headline achievements, not everything, but I'm going to see whether or not I can at least get some of it in. So start the clock. We've created 92,000 jobs. We've built more than 2,200 state houses. We've banned offshore speculators. We've planted 140 million trees. We've got better cancer care through radiation machines, Pharmac funding, and created an essential cancer agency. We've delivered cheaper doctors' visits for over 500,000 people. We're taking mental health seriously with mental health advisors and GPs and doctors' clinics across the country. We've increased minimum wage to $17.70. We've hired 2,000 more doctors and nurses. We're building more classrooms in schools for 100,000 students. We've brought unemployment to the lowest rate in 11 years. We've got the highest increase in wages in a decade. We've helped 1 million Kiwis pay their bills with their winter energy payment. We've boosted incomes for 384,000 families through the Families Package. We've increased school funding so parents don't have to pay school donations and NCEA fees. We're breaking the cycle of family and sexual violence with massive boosts in funding. We've deployed 1,607 new police officers. We've made state highways safer. We've banned single-use plastic bags. We've started the clean-up job on our rivers and lakes through planting trees and fencing waterways. We've supported young people into training and apprenticeships. We've introduced a free lunches in schools program. We've provided more funding for addiction treatment beds and services. We're paying teachers, nurses and police officers more. We've resumed contributions to the super fund. We've set standards for rental homes. We've extended paid parental leave. We've ramped up the research, development and tax incentives. We're helping homeless individuals through into homes through Housing First. We've banned military-style semi-automatic and assault rifles. We've introduced the zero carbon bill. We've started fixing rundown hospitals. We've invested in public transport, extended nurses in schools to cover decile 4 and 5 secondary schools for almost 30,000 extra students. We've passed the Child Poverty Reduction Act and have lifted between 50 and 70,000 children out of poverty. We've provided the first funding increase in 10 years to early childhood education. We've banned smoking in cars with children. We've began the Royal Commission of Inquiry into historic historical abuse in state care and in care of faith-based institutions. We've set up a suicide prevention office and developed a suicide prevention strategy. We've created Mana and Aki, putting mental health support in every primary and intermediate school in Christchurch and Kaikoura. We gave families an extra $3,000 a year for the first year of a child's life. We boosted funding for air ambulances. We lifted the cap on gender reassignment surgeries. We banned microbeads. We've boosted funding for KiwiRail. We reduced the prison population for the first time in a decade. We established Te Arawhiti, the Office for Māori Crown Relations, to make the Crown a better treaty partner. We increased New Zealand's refugee quota. We're leading on the Christchurch call to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online, and we're making sure New Zealand history is taught in all schools and kura. 2 minutes 56, but a great list.
Now, I originally just saw when she was cut off after 2 minutes, which that was actually the full version there. I think the one that I saw, they were good to actually cut her off for 2 minutes. Somebody in our chat noticed the hand sign that she accidentally made, but what I was thinking throughout her listing all of those achievements is just the taxpayer dollar amounts going up, the spending going up, and that obviously is going to cost a lot of money,
right.
hire a lot of people.
It's a lot of spending that's gone on, and a couple of the failures that weren't mentioned. Although I won't hold that to them because I'm glad they failed in the areas where they have failed on their promises. But a few of these things I might address, and a few of them have come up in the chat as well. But she talked about banning semi-automatic style assault rifle, assault, blah blah blah. Buzzwords around firearms, but what they've actually done is banned all semi-automatic, hunting rifles and anything that's a centerfire semi-automatic, and the current retrieval rate on those is about 13 or 14%. I haven't checked this week's numbers; it may be going up, but they're on track to maybe still hit 20%, which was my initial prediction, which is the same as what Australia got. In their buyback. So you're banning them is one thing, but they don't mention they can't actually recover them. One of the interesting things she mentioned as well was putting 1,600 police officers on the street, which is one of the Labour Party's big promises. Except what they initially promised was to train 1,600 more police officers, or like to increase the number of police officers. What they've done instead is just taken the number of trainees that were going through already, and then counted all of those and not subtracted the police officers who have quit. So they haven't actually increased the overall numbers by that much, but they've just they're just counting the standard rate of increase of new police officers coming through training. And the one thing I am happy about, though, is she mentioned getting $3,000 for having babies. So I do think that's her best policy, is paying people to have babies. And so I do recommend to people, if you need some more money, just have more babies. Jacinda's handing out a lot of money for that. It's something I've cottoned on to as well. So that's Jacinda's big draw card, is have more babies, get more money.
Well, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people in this chat who would like it that she's encouraging already native New Zealand citizens to have children rather than, well, Jacinda Ardern has it, because she's relaxed the where you can take immigrants and refugees from. How is the actual immigration rate changed? Because that was actually one of the policies she ran on, to limit immigration.
So they've increased the quota. So they so they ran on reducing immigration, which they've reduced net immigration slightly because more New Zealanders are leaving the country, which always happens during a Labour government. So the actual rate, and they've managed to issue less visas as well, I believe, permanent residencies and so on. So some of these numbers are down. And it's helpful that Kiwis are fleeing to Australia. And as one of our great prime ministers once said, the average IQ of both countries goes up when that happens. And so yeah, in terms of what she's sort of relaxed has been where refugees are coming from, and they've increased the refugee quota. And that's what's been increased in terms of tightening up immigration. That's not really happened beyond we refer to the partnership visa criteria changing and so on. That's basically where they've been making some tweaks.
And speaking of government spending, we had the release of the finding of the Royal Commission into aged care, which again was triggered by a Four Corners ABC investigation, which showed camera footage of elderly people being mistreated in nursing homes and retirement facilities. And of course, one of the solutions is, well, there's practical solutions such as not having so much medication and restraints, treating people with a bit more dignity, which is always good, but that the sector, aged care sector, is drastically underfunded, which is the taxpayer money. That is what has enticed all of these aged care providers to get into the sector, get as many people into these facilities as possible, so they can get the government money. And one of the things that the Royal Commission found is that if you can make it look like you're struggling, like your staff are struggling, you get more money. And it happens in any sector when there's a pot of government money. About 5 years ago, we had the rorting in the vocational education sector where students were signing up for courses they didn't finish and couldn't pay back the loans. And let's not forget the university system. They get millions of taxpayers' money. Billions, I don't have but of course, where does that money go? Is it improving the university degrees so more of their graduates will gain employment? No. And so throwing more money at it is the wrong solution. It's the more money you put in, then the more grifters and rent seekers you have.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The more money that you throw at the problem, the bigger the problem gets, because the more money that will be needed to maintain that problem and maintain the source of funding.
And we should finish off that. Well, you actually didn't know that Jacinda Ardern was out of the country, but in Australia we were told that Scott Morrison was in Bangkok, Thailand, for the ASEAN summit, which stands for Association of Southeast Asian Nations. They've signed up the nations to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. India didn't sign up to it because, well, they're wary of China's influence in Southeast Asia. Scott Morrison, he had a meeting with the Chinese Premier, Li Keqiang, I think that's how you pronounce it. He said that the meeting was honest and candid. He didn't say it was stern, but he said that we recognise we're different nations. Australia's a liberal democracy, they're a Communist Party state, but we don't want to change each other's nations. So we'll see if both Australia and China uphold their end of the bargains in that, because we know there's pressure on Scott Morrison to stand up for democracy in Hong Kong, and also the Chinese, well, they're obviously wanting to expand their influence. There was an interesting story about China using the old World Bank trip of getting African nations to sign up to loans they can't repay to get them hooked on Chinese influence. So China, I don't think, is going to hold up their end of the bargain by not interfering in Australia's system of government.
And hopefully Scott Morrison doesn't either. Which is a bit like Trump saying, "Oh yes, my relationship with China, it's better than ever. It's all going great. You know, we're," which he says to the media, and of course he keeps up the pressure as soon as he walks away. But you did say I did know that Jacinda was not in New Zealand. It's difficult to keep track of where she is, which is why I didn't know where she was. I'm glad your media keeps you informed on the location of Jacinda. But due to Winston Peters being in court and taking to the witness stand as acting Prime Minister, which was the
why was he in court?
Case against the National? So it's this court case against the National Party that's ongoing because they leaked documents showing that he was claiming the pension as being single, when in fact he is in a relationship with someone. And so he was getting it's not quite twice as much, but a lot more money than he was entitled to for many, many years. And the media had reported on this as the story of the acting prime minister was defending himself in court on the witness stand. So that's how we know that Jacinda's overseas whenever the headlines refer to Winston Peters as the acting prime minister.
Well, what if he's found in contempt of court for some reason? Who becomes the prime minister then?
This is there's I believe a deputy leader of the Labour Party. I don't think either of us know who the deputy leader of the
No,
Labour
I
Party is.
don't.
I thought Chris Hipkins is the leader of the House. I do believe he may cover sometimes, but it might be the Finance Minister Grant Robertson. I don't actually know who their deputy leader is, which I should know. I'm sorry about that, but due to the second in command essentially being Winston Peters, you never know who the third in line is.
I heard that it was just popped up on my Facebook feed. One of your MPs in the Parliament, she went viral for saying during the zero carbon debate, "Okay, boomer."
Yeah, that was. I was say the youngest one of the Green MPs, and Chloe Swarbrick, I believe. Yeah,
Because
she ran for Auckland mayor at one point. Yeah, okay, boomers. So yeah, she's hip and cool with the memes. Because she's not much older than I am, I believe, a couple of years probably. I have been corrected, by the way. The deputy leader of the Labour Party is Kelvin Davis. Who's very famous for his incompetence, which is why you never hear about him. They don't actually let him do anything, which is the reason I was thinking of Chris Hipkins. I remember now is because it was one time where Kelvin Davis was supposed to be answering for the Prime Minister in the House, and they had the leader of the House, who was Chris Hipkins, answer instead because they couldn't risk having the deputy leader of the Labour Party answer questions.
So he's just they try to keep him in a box as much as possible. That's who you want as your deputy leader. A final thing, because we have gone a bit over time. While I've got you here, obviously the big story in the right wing American scene is, of course, the Groypers and Zoomers basically going to Turning Point USA culture war events and asking confronting questions of its founder and leader Charlie Kirk, and they're all following the America First host Nick Fuentes. So I just want to get your view, because you obviously consider yourself more of a moderate mainstream conservative. What's your opinion of the Groypers and Nick Fuentes?
Well, I actually when I saw this when I was sent this video and I saw the Q&A session with Charlie Kirk, I thought it was simply amazing what they had done. And I mentioned Mark Stein earlier in the show, and he's an older gentleman in his he's not that old, in his 50s probably. And he has actually been arguing against Conservatism Inc. for a long time. He's been talking, immigration issues and demographic issues for a long time. And he is a sort of, mainstream conservative who says, they keep saying that these are not the hills to die on, and they keep stepping back on all of these issues, all of these important issues. They keep stepping back on all of the social issues. And what's the point, right? What's the point of doing this if all you're going to be is chasing, tax cuts for corporations? What's the point of conservatism? And so I'm just really excited to see the Zoomers, like myself. I think I'm just a millennial by maybe a year or so. I can consider myself an honorary Zoomer, even though I act like a boomer all the time. I think Nick himself might be a little bit too controversial for me. But I think I'm enjoying following along with what they're doing, and I totally agree with their approach to target what they're referring to as the grifters, basically these Conservatism Inc. types who are just libertarians and embrace a whole bunch of left-wing issues and give up a whole bunch of ground. So they get a thumbs up from me.
And on my Wilmsfront program tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Melbourne time on Tim Wilm's YouTube channel, I'll be basically summarising, because there's been a new development every day in the Groyper Zoomer War on Conservatism Inc. I'll be doing a full comprehensive summary of it, and I hope to be putting together, I'm doing another long, grand article basically summarizing all of this, because it's also the post-Joker world as well, because Nick Fentes, if you've seen his show, he has quite a Joker type personality with the chaos and panic he's causing. So that'll be the topic of my show tomorrow night. And so I hope you'll all join me there. And of course, after that, 8:15 p.m. Melbourne time, it's of course Diewue Trans weekly live stream.
And you can catch me on rightminds.nz or thebfd.co.nz. And you will get some articles from me. I'm working on something related to Reformation Day and Guy Fawkes, and so and I have been thinking of covering some of the Groypers and Conservatism Inc. side of things as well. But we'll see how that goes, and you can tune in next week here at 9 p.m. New Zealand time on the Right Minds channel, and I do hope to see you all next week.
How much subscribers are you? Because obviously, to get super chats, you need 1,000 and a certain amount of hours.
We're sitting at 400, just over 430. So we've got a little while to go. But please do subscribe if you're watching, and that's going to help us get the super chats. And I have promised to get the entropy set up. That's still on my to-do list.
Yeah. And even if you're watching the stream through the Unshackled YouTube channel, that channel has 7,300 subscribers. So just head on. It's pretty easy. Just head on over and click the subscribe button. You don't even need to click the bell to now notifications if you don't want to, which you should for most of all of the other channels. But yeah, you just need those subs up. I noticed that Nick Fentes's live show, it's just like he can't read out all the super chats, he's just getting money thrown at them, so we want that for you as well.
And for you as well, you do great work with your Australian shows, and you can go to rightminds.nz/donate to support me, and Tim, you can donate as well. You can donate to him as well.
Yep, we've got our premium membership at theunshackled.net/membership, our web donation form at theunshackled.net/donate. We're, of course, on subscribestar.com/theunshackled, and, of course, Patreon and PayPal. So there's heaps of different ways at your convenience to support the work of the Unshackled, and of course still publishing regular content on the unshackled.net. We've got a few new contributors publishing now, so myself and Steele, who hosts his Detonation program most weekday mornings Melbourne time. Obviously, since we are focused more on the broadcasting side of things at the moment, we're not producing as many articles, but we have had new members of the team to make sure there's at least one per day. On a good day, we might get 2, 3, or 4 articles in a day. That's excluding the web posts of our live shows. So definitely we're keeping up with the cycle, both in broadcast and written form. And of course, how can I not mention Thursday night, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time, the centrepiece of the Australian alt media lineup, the Uncuckables, which of course is joint production between the Unshackled, XYZ, and the Rational Rise. Of course, that'll be with the who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 days with the Groyper War, and so that'll be unmissable, that show.
I'm looking forward to it as well. And that's all from us tonight, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, and you can catch up on the podcast version of this show. It's on my Wilmsfront podcast RSS, so go to timwilms.com and click on the link to your favourite podcasting platform. So that's it from us this week. Thank you for staying up later, everyone, and we'll be back next week at the same time.
Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Trans Tasman Talk. To keep up with the latest real news and analysis from the Tasman nations, visit theunshackled.net and rightminds.nz.